Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Timely Action Hour podcast. This is the show where we talk about everything from Star Wars to Superman and everything in between. My name is Aidan, and I hope that you're doing well today. This is Season 4, Episode 7, and today we are going to be discussing the Star Wars on-screen timeline, and this is going to be something a little different because there are three different timelines in the Star Wars franchise. There's G-canon, the EU, and then there's Disney canon. So G-canon is everything that was either produced or sanctioned by George Lucas, the creator of Star Wars. The EU, or Expanded Universe, is novels and comic books and video games released between 1976 and 2012. And then Disney canon is everything after Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm. And like I said, I want to be discussing the canon based off of all of the materials produced by Mr. Lucas himself. Now, this is going to be the chronological order. And I'm using the in-universe dating system. So there's BBY, which means before the Battle of Yavin, which is the final battle at the end of the original film in 1977. And then there's ABY, which is after the Battle of Yavin. So the Lucas canon begins with the 1999 film Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, which takes place 35 years before the Battle of Yavin. Then we skip ahead 10 years to Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, which is the film released in 2002, taking place in 25 BBY. Then we have Clone Wars Season 1. This is the show which ran from 2003 to 2005. It was produced and directed by Genndy Tartakovsky, who was also the head of the animation style, but it was executively produced and sanctioned by George Lucas, so that's why it's included. Season 1 takes place in 25 BBY, 4 months after Attack of the Clones. Season 2 concludes that first year of the war, also taking place in 25 BBY. And then we get Season 3, Episode 1 of Clone Wars. Then we get the 2008 Clone Wars film, which takes place in 24 BBY. And then we get the Clone Wars Seasons 1 through 6. This is airing between 2008 and 2014. Now, I know that I say that Disney canon began in 2014, but since this had already been written and animated, they just released it after the acquisition on Netflix. So this does count, but I am sort of bending the rules here, but that's only because Lucasfilm did that themselves in the real world. So Seasons 1 through 6 of the Clone Wars taking place between 23 and 21 BBY. Season 7 is part of Disney canon. Then we get the original series Clone Wars, Season 3, Episodes 2 through 5, so the rest of the show. That all takes place in 20 BBY. Then we get the 2005 film Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, taking place in 20 BBY. Then we get the TV show Droids, The Adventures of R2-D2 and C-3PO, which aired in 1985. It just had one season, but, it was a cartoon that was mainly made to sell toys, but it was fun. But Droids takes place in 15 BBY. Then we have Episode 4, A New Hope, which takes place in 0 ABY/ABY. So this is, just a few days before the Battle of Yavin, then the Battle of Yavin. So that's when the timeline sort of. That's when the dating system sort of branches. Then we get the holiday special, which takes place 1 year after the Battle of Yavin. Then we have, and this aired in 1978, and the first film, like I said, came out in 1977. And then we get 1980's Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, taking place 3 years after the Battle of Yavin. Then we have the film Caravan of Courage, an Ewok Adventure, also taking place in 3 ABY. This was released in 1984. Then we have Ewoks, The Battle for Endor, which was released in 1985 and takes place in 3 ABY. And also in 1985 to 86, to 86, we get Ewoks Seasons 1 and 2, also taking place in 3 ABY. And the Lucas canon timeline ends with 1983's Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, which takes place in 4 ABY. Now, like I said, 3 different forms of canon, and I enjoy parts of the Disney canon, but I'm more inclined to enjoy what George Lucas made and the expanded universe, because there were a lot, even though there were inconsistencies in all 3 canons, and there were longer periods in which those inconsistencies could sort of become their own thing. With that being said, Mr. Lucas and his team and the writers he employed to create the EU, because they were directly contracted by him to create these stories. A lot of people have a lot of debates based on, what happened. I've never met the man myself, obviously. I'm just going off of interviews that I've watched and read, and interviews from the people who worked on this. For example, Matthew Stover, who was a prolific writer in the Star Wars EU, I believe he's the one who wrote the novelization of Revenge of the Sith, and he said that, every week he'd have to be on the phone with George to say, okay, so I wrote this, and the script you sent me for the movie that I'm adapting says this. Can I add something to that? And he would be like, yeah, or no, don't do that. So that's just one example of how the EU was created and how it relates to the movies. But even though there are inconsistencies, I do prefer it because it has more time and love put into creating these stories, rather than Disney's idea of like, okay, so will this sell? And does this set up our own continuity? And I do love the Star Wars Jedi games, which came out in the Disney canon, and I did like the show Andor. At the time of recording, Season 2 just started airing, but I haven't seen it yet. But I did enjoy Season 1. It was very well written and acted, and but I'm not the biggest fan of their sequel trilogy. And their other shows are, hit or miss. But anyway, that's enough rambling. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the National Timely Action Hour. Once again, my name is Aiden, and if you're new to this podcast and want to check out more episodes, please subscribe and share this with your friends. Leave me a comment suggesting any future videos. Tell me what you think about this episode. And I also post this on youtube.com, so in the description of the video format, I'll leave the links to my Patreon page and merch store, so if you'd like to support this channel financially, I'd greatly appreciate that. You get a slew of benefits like early access to episodes of my podcast and my main YouTube channel videos. I'll also leave that linked in the description of the YouTube version. I'll also leave the links to my social media profile so you can get updates about the podcast and my main channel, and you can also send me a message. But thank you so much for listening, and I sincerely hope that you have a wonderful day. Goodbye.